The drug kingpins who turned meth into big business were the Amezcua brothers of Mexico. But no supermarket in the world could sell the Amezcuas the tons of ephedrine their operation required. So where were they getting it? From the same factories where the American pharmaceutical industry bought the key ingredients in its cold medicines. 12 miles outside Nellore, India, stands the Krebs Biochemicals factory. In this warehouse alone, there is enough raw material to make 10 million hits of meth. Krebs is one of just 9 factories that manufacture almost all of the world's ephedrine and pseudoephedrine.
Methamphetamine, unlike most other hard drugs out there, is uniquely susceptible to supply-side intervention because it's not something you can grow. It's not something you get out of poppy fields or out of coca plants. It's something you got to cook up in a factory. You got to make this stuff.
But while the U.S. government was spending billions trying to control heroin and cocaine, meth was such a low priority that no one was bothering to monitor who was shopping at the 9 factories that make the key ingredients in meth.
We at Krebs Biochemicals would have been much, much happier if only there was some guidance given by the DEA or the proper authorities in the United States about these are the legitimate users. You are okay if you have any business dealings with these guys. Guidance in that fashion could have certainly helped us at Krebs Biochemicals in being perhaps a better citizen. Maybe we do not know how much of our material would have landed into the illegitimate hands. That could have certainly been prevented.
During one 18-month period in the early 1990s, the Amezcua brothers purchased 170 tons of ephedrine from the 9 factories and shipped it into the United States, where it was turned into 2 billion hits of meth. The meth on America's streets was suddenly cheap, plentiful, and most important, remarkably pure. And soon the addiction rate skyrocketed, creating the first great spike of American meth abuse.
When you're just looking at numbers on a chart, you see this huge increase in meth use in the early 1990s. Well, that's the Amezcua brothers. The unraveling of their supply line was the key to knocking that mountain down. It happened purely by chance.
March of 1994, plane landed in Dallas, Texas. There were Lufthansa flight. Customs officer went aboard just to see what the cargo was and discovered that there were 120 of these cardboard chemical-type containers in there. And then he noticed that the company of origin, you could almost read it through the top cover, but it had been painted over. And he pulled a sample, and he called the DEA, and next thing you know, it came up. It was 3.4 metric tons of ephedrine destined for Mexico City that had landed in Dallas en route.
Up until this point in time, the DEA, by its own admission, did not even really have a clue that the Amezcua brothers were obtaining hundreds of tons of ephedrine a year.
Soon, the super labs in California's Central Valley began running out of ephedrine, and the purity of the meth on America's streets began to plunge. The impact of that decline can be measured not just in statistics, but in lives.
We go to these lab sites, and there's garbage bags and garbage bags of empty bottles, and they all have been razor cut at the bottom, and they've dumped all the pills out. But when they dump a pill out, they have to remove a binder, which holds the pill together. Lots of times that binder's cornstarch. So what they did is they would use huge containers full of denatured alcohol, and they'd evaporate it off. Well, now we started having fires and explosions. Now we started getting ranches blowing up all over our state. And before you know it, 60% of the labs we were dealing with were through fires and explosions.
To avoid the danger, the cartel bosses left the actual cooking to migrant workers, tempted by the chance to get rich quick.
We raided a lab years ago with the Fresno Police Department, and when we hit this lab, it was at a ranch. And boy, I tell you what, it was a beautiful ranch, but it was just a farmhouse for a laborer. This guy had 3, 4 kids, I can't remember, and they brought all the chemicals through the children's bedroom, and all the waste that was spilling was all in the carpet where the kids lived and slept. We hit the place, and of course, the owner of the property pulls up. What are you doing on my property? Well, we just raided a very, very large methamphetamine lab. I'll never forget this. Well, he's one of the best employees I've ever had. He's worked for me for 9 years. I just gave him a raise to $6 an hour. And we're just looking at him. And we walked the rancher over to the little farm laborer's truck, and in a paper sack is $27,000. And we tell him, well, you might have given him a raise to $6 an hour after 9 years, but it appears the second job is paying a little better. And that's what it's all about. You know it's wrong. The greed kicks in. Now all of a sudden, there's more money than you can ever imagine. But what happens? This guy's life was changed forever.
With migrant superlab cooks turning pseudoephedrine pills into meth around the clock, the purity of the meth on American streets began rising dramatically once more, creating the second mountain of meth abuse. Even worse, the number of states where meth use was reaching epidemic proportions was increasing. The epidemic had begun to spread from west to east. But it still hadn't reached across the Mississippi, and most politicians remained ignorant of the threat. But for the Mexican drug cartels, there was a far more reliable source close to home. In Tijuana alone, there are now, by some estimates, 1,000 more pharmacies than sales to the public can support. Not coincidentally, the city is now believed to house as many as 1,000 meth labs.
Pharmacies in Mexico are currently restricted to selling only 3 boxes at a time. I went to a marketplace in Mexico City just to see what I could buy. I went with a Mexican citizen, and we asked, how many can you give us? We went to 3 different places, and all of them told us, we can give you as many as you want.
In 2004, Mexican pharmaceutical companies legally imported 224 tons of pseudoephedrine, twice as much as they needed to make cold medicine. The extra 100 tons was cooked into meth, then smuggled, like other drugs, across the border into the U.S. As a result, the meth on American streets is as pure as it's ever been.
That is what we're seeing coming from Mexico. Really good crystal.
That amount of meth that we just got, if we had got that 2 or 3 years ago, we would have just about fainted. Nowadays, there's so much dope out here that that's commonplace. We get that amount off of 1 or 2 people every week.
The consequences are sobering, for with meth being made in Mexico, the drug cartels are now using their traditional smuggling routes to reach the eastern United States. Among the first to be affected are small towns throughout the southeast, which have become part of the meth crime wave. Soon, eastern states may face the same plight as western ones, where over 50% of those in prison are meth addicts. The price for their communities will include not just the property they will steal and the money spent keeping them behind bars, but the cost to their families and the children abandoned and abused.
They are having multiple traumatic events: physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, exposure to drug use and criminal behavior. And we are producing an entire generation of people who believe criminal behavior and activity and drug use is normal. That has just tremendous cost for our society if we don't do something drastically now to change that.
Huge volumes of methamphetamine are being shipped up through the hub of Atlanta and are flooding the East Coast right now. And that's bad and good. That's bad for the East Coast because now they're feeling the meth epidemic for the first time. It's good for the West Coast in the sense that Congress is finally starting to pay attention.
Members of both parties have begun to question the Bush administration's response to meth.